Hello, I'm Bliznub, and welcome to Building the Best. Today we're going to be looking at Spore Saryn, which is very, very convoluted. So, off the bat, I'm going to explain this one in depth to try and help you guys understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, but for those of you who just want to see the build and move on with your lives, here it is. And I would probably put Cunning Drift up here. Cunning Drift over here. Anyhow, let's get into it. So, Spore Saryn is arguably the most effective form of Saryn, although I'm not going to bother arguing that point because miasma is also a part of this build. It is incredibly powerful. Now, the spores deal damage per second, and deal viral damage per second, and the spores are spread basically by popping one spore. It spreads to all enemies within a range. So the most important part of this build is the range. So we have spread range at almost 38 meters, a little bit of damage here provided by our power strength, and a reasonable amount of duration. Because we want to be able to spread the spores, we need the duration to be high enough that they can continue spreading, if that makes sense, whilst we're not worrying about placing them and are worrying about popping them. That should hopefully make sense. Anyhow, the most important thing a spore does, however, is not actually deal viral damage, it's deal toxic damage, which does not come innately with the spore. However, if an enemy has toxic damage on him when the spore is popped, that toxic damage will be transferred over to all the nearby enemies who get a spore on them. I hope that made sense. Now, whilst the viral damage is locked based on your power strength, so here I'm getting 36 damage, give or take, the toxic damage is not. The toxic damage is a percentage of the initial base damage when triggered. So the initial toxic damage on the target that had the spore, when you pop it, a percentage of that is dealt to all of his buddies. Now that percentage is affected by power strength, so we have a little bit of power strength there, but at the same time we're not worrying too much about that. We're getting about 40% of our initial base damage transferred, and that is a lot of toxic damage. So that's awesome. Now moving on from that, we have miasma, the second half of this build, and what most people will be here for, because miasma was changed drastically when Saryn was many months ago now, and hasn't really been the same since. But to explain, miasma's damage was never nerfed. If anything, it was actually buffed a tiny amount, but it's just now different. She's now a damage per second frame, and so we have a little bit of duration here, but unfortunately I couldn't quite get the duration and the range balanced right, so our duration had to take a hit here. We can see it's still fine for the spores, 15 seconds is enough to transfer them around the map, but for miasma, we're going to have to rely on this little 3.8 second duration to kill lots and lots of enemies. So we're dealing 600 damage, and that 600 damage is immediately doubled if there is a viral or toxic proc on the enemy. So multiplied by 4 if you have both. So basically multiplied by 6 as viral damage actually halves the... viral procs actually halve the enemy's health. It is procs that give you the double damage, sorry. So miasma's little 600 damage is actually dealing quite a lot more than that, 3,600 in fact, if they have both a viral and a toxic proc on them. So it won't actually deal 3,600, it will deal 2,500, but because viral you know what I mean. Viral damage. The viral proc makes things interesting, and I realise it's actually times 8 damage, not times 6. That's awesome. Anyhow, now, the thing about this build is, unfortunately, it isn't just Saryn. Like, these are the mods we've gone for. We have loads of range. Like I say, I'd put more range on this if I could. We have a little bit of efficiency, a little bit of negative efficiency, a lot of power strength, and just a little bit of duration, getting ourselves a nice balance whilst thoroughly cementing our range as being our main stat. We have vitality in here for survivability. Arguably, regenerative molt would be better than vitality, but I feel like Spore Saryn has energy problems as it is, so I didn't want to have to be casting my 2 all the time when I'm taking damage. And Saryn already has quite a high base health, so I felt like a decent vitality would work on this very well. And actually, let me just put on my 12-point vitality here whilst I'm doing that. So we're getting 925 health, and on to the most important part of this build, which is the weapons, because we're not just worried about placing spores, we need to spread them, and well, the spores appear on a target and you can shoot them individually. What's best to be done is use an AoE weapon to pop the spores. So we have here our top two contenders, the two schools of thought on the matter, the Mutilus Cernos, which of course fires its own unique little gas cloud to the enemy, and that's epic. That the gas cloud will give toxic damage and toxic procs on the target, and will also damage the spores spreading them. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And we're getting about 4,400 toxic gas damage on the weapon itself. So if the weapon itself, with this crazy high status chance of 100%, procs a gas proc, we're going to get ridiculous amounts of damage transferred. However, there is a chance it will proc something other than gas proc. The actual passive gas proc which the Mutilus Cernos throws isn't that damaging, but does last a while, to be fair, so you get lots of back and forth with spores getting procced. However, the problem with this is just that there is a chance for us not to actually deal gas damage to the target. There's a chance for us to just deal impact damage and to instantly kill it, and then the little flying gas orb landing on a dead body. That's not going to do well for spreading spores. I mean, the spore will spread when the target dies, it just won't actually take any gas damage with it. So we have, so obviously for this first school of thought, which is dealing as much gas damage as we can, to have the spores deal as much damage over time as possible. Very, very cool, and you can use this with basically any AoE weapon. The Torrid works fantastically with this, but I found the Mutilus Cernos gelled best with my playstyle. Now the other school of thought is screw the toxic procs, forget them completely. We can spread the spores even faster if we're just setting them off as fast as is possible, because every time a spore lands on an enemy, it immediately deals viral damage. If that spore is instantly reset and replaced with another spore, it's then going to deal another tick of viral damage. So we have the Haiku Prime with concealed explosives. Now this is very funny and very entertaining to do at any time of the day, and honestly, this is just a fire rate, little bit of mag size, and concealed explosives, with as much multi-shot as possible. So we're throwing 3 projectiles, each of which will deal 500 damage 80% of the time. And that will be done in an AoE with blast damage, so there's no toxic being transferred at all. However, 21 fire rate basically means that each second we are applying 60 times 500 damage, and resetting the spore that many times. Assuming that you just sweep it over a crowd of enemies, you will reset the spore ridiculously fast, dealing massive amounts of viral damage. Although, bear in mind that our base viral damage is only 36, the Haiku itself is actually going to deal almost that much damage just based on concealed explosives, but obviously the viral proc is nice. So yeah, there we have it. Haiku, you will see in a minute, is far more impressive than it lets on, whilst the Mutilus Cernos, if you get lucky and do get that gas proc, is ridiculously powerful, and I really mean that. I have one-shot entire crowds of sortie level enemies and just been left standing there going, wait, what just happened? So let's go try this out, and unfortunately the sortie today is a bit it's Corpus, so I'm going to be going, it's a Corpus Interception, it's just So I'm going to be going up against some Grineer here, which obviously have the most resistances to viral and toxic damage. Except Infested. I believe Infested are resistant to viral damage, but can anyone truly be resistant to a viral proc that instantly halves your health? I mean, really. And bear in mind that Saryn's passive increases the duration of effects such as the viral and toxic procs that we're playing with. So yeah, so let's start off with the Mutilus Cernos. So I put the little spore on this fine gentleman and shoot him in the spore. And he's immediately taking not as much damage as I hoped, because I actually missed. But there we go. And now all of his friends are taking massive amounts of viral and toxic damage per second and melting to death. More than even Ember does. Actually, I don't know about that. Ember does melt enemies quite a lot. But we can see there I actually got a gas proc, and these enemies are just dying massively. And the spores are traveling quite far over the level and seriously dealing massive amounts of damage to these guys. I've already killed half this mission. kind of accidentally. I didn't want to kill half of this mission. I was hoping to be able to show off the haiku a little bit and maybe my ult too. So here we have contestant number 2, the haiku. So I put down a spore and then I just randomly flail my haiku at the ground and everything appears to have died. Oh, there's a... Oh no, they're all dead. That's a weird visual bug there. Okay. Anyhow, apart from this fine gentleman who was in the next room, who can just eat my haiku to his face, everyone appears to be dead. So, as you can see, Spore, Haiku, Prophet. And that's pretty much how it's done. And if anything does actually survive this combo, just remember that you can just ult and immediately deal massive amounts of damage. And whilst that is damage over time, we're talking about ridiculous quantities of damage over time. Each second, we're going to be getting multiple thousands of damage. Well, more depending on whether or not we have viral and toxic procs, but even without Spore's effect on these enemies, we're going to be getting crazy, crazy amounts of damage done. So, there we have it. Spore Saryn. Which, again, arguably the most effective kind of Saryn there is now. Also bear in mind that your 3 Toxic Lash provides 100% toxic damage on your melee and is incredibly useful for applying toxic damage and spreading it to enemies. Now then, that was all very long and wordy, so for those of you who have stuck with me to the very end, a treat for you! The 2 hardest to get curia in the game! One of which is right here, and one of which is right over there? It's at the top of one of these peaks. I should have brought a sniper rifle. But yeah, it's at the top of one of these pieces of rock, and honestly, actually, there it is. You see it? Did you see that flash up on the screen for a second there? It's almost impossible to bullet jump up there and, well, unless you're Loki, and scan the thing, so scan it from up there standing on top of the other one. That is, of course, presuming you actually care about curia. Anyhow, thank you guys very much for watching. As always, please like and comment below, and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm Bliznub, and this is Spore Saryn. Wait, hold still. Is Spore Saryn. I don't stand a chance.